call the meeting to order. And may we have a roll call? Bob?
Yes.
Steve?
Here.
Tanya?
Here.
Teresa?
Here.
Jeff?
Here.
Here. And Paula, we're all here.
Mr. Jeff Schwartz.
Jeff Schwartz is not going to be here. Okay. All right. Is there approval for the minutes of August 2nd? Okay, seconded by Jim Kearns. Any additions, deletions, or anything? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Public comment. Is there any public comment? No. Member comments? Yes, Teresa.
So I just wanted to let the committee know that a couple of people, former employees, have come to talk to me, and they basically what they would like from our committee is to read reports from the resident committee and reports from the employee. I mean, Tom can correct me what their correct name is for them.
Resident Council and Employee Council.
Obvious names, yeah. Read reports, 2 minutes from those. Read the actual report coming from like IVPH and other organizations that come to View Valley High. What else do they want? Oh, and to read comments from like the surveys that come from the residents' families, and the employees.
So you'll be receiving additional information that hopefully will help us do our jobs better. Thank you, Teresa. Any other? Okay. Valley High Administrator report.
Okay. A couple topics I want to hit on today. First one being the COVID-19 update that's on the front of the administrator's report. I just wanted to gauge from everybody how they would feel if we eliminated that from being in the report and only report by exception. So if something was to occur, I'm trying to move past that as being a primary driver. If everybody was in agreement to that. Okay.
Yep.
With the nodding of the heads, I'm going to go ahead and start taking that out and focus on operational. As you guys can see, the census continues to climb upward. We actually, last month, shattered the record for most admissions in a year that since I've been keeping records. That goes back about 13 years worth of data. Good and bad things with that. So we more than likely hit our census targets by the end of the year, but we are going through some growing pains with the staff. The pace is different. When we have this many admissions and discharges, it's a different type of stay than some of the staff are used to. A lot of my longtime staff are used to the resident that comes in and stays 2, 3, 4 years, whereas most of our admissions right now are short-term. They're in 14 to 20, 25 days, and then they're discharged back home to the community or back to an assisted living facility. So we've got a little bit of growing pains going on. We're working through them on a regular basis. But it's definitely a new feel for the staff. We are at a pressure point here with staffing and the census. We're going to need a couple more nurses. And unfortunately, the applications are still just not, we're getting a few here and there, but not enough to really get us moving to that next level. So that's going to be our biggest challenge. We do have nursing management covering night shifts, especially on the weekends right now, as we try to work through it. One of the things that we're doing a little bit differently now than we have just even a couple weeks ago to try to get ahead of this is doing the schedules instead of being in 2 weeks at a time. We have gone to a full block for the nurses and the CNAs, and I've got them out now as much as 2 cycles, and by the end of this week, 3 schedule cycles. And where this will help is that the registry and agency staff that we're using to help backfill some of the holes now have a full month in advance of availability so that they can start planning a little bit ahead of that, hopefully filling their schedule with our available shifts versus filling their schedules with other ones, and then we're getting kind of the last little bit. So we've already started to see a little bit more pickup, so hopefully that, as we continue to push the schedules out in advance. The key here is that it's block scheduling, so they know exactly what your schedule is. Every 2 weeks it just repeats, and so they can schedule their appointments based on that. Different personal things, and then on days where they can't, they can find someone they can trade on their own, and kind of putting the power of the scheduling in their hands. I will still help them get coverage for vacation requests, things like that. But like after the schedule's already printed, so post-request period, it's now going to be a more of a self-scheduling format. So that should help alleviate some of that side of it. But the pressures on staffing, and we'll talk more about that when we do the budget. Right now is where it's being felt the most. Any questions on census or staffing? Okay. Just a couple project updates. So the memory care project, the construction manager RFQ is getting put together right now, so we can get that out and ready to go. The contract for the architectural design work is already finalized, so we're getting started with that. So the project is continuing to move forward. Hopefully with the spring, drawings coming to you guys for some thoughts and then looking at that. But construction manager and Tom Burrows will kind of be taking the lead for the initial phase, and my team will be meeting with the architect and their team in the coming weeks to start talking about ideas, potential design concepts and things along those lines. The other projects we have going on right now, the 2 shower rooms that were remodeled are in full service. The other 2 are past the demo phase now, so we're already looking at, we did the plumbing inspections last week and looking at going ahead and starting tile work and case work and getting those back online, which would really help for the second floor, which we now, it's full because of the way we moved the short-term, long-term, so they have that second shower online would make it a lot easier on the staff. All the other projects that are, still part of that therapy room expansion are starting to come to a close. We've kind of gone through the final punch list, just waiting on the fence for the courtyard to be installed, and then the therapy gym space is done, and then the dining rooms are wrapped up, and the kitchenettes we're working on just getting we're struggling with getting a stainless steel company out to help with the tables that are in there now and redesign it, but we're still working through that. So that should wrap up most of that therapy project by the end of the year, the therapy room and all the subsequent project below that, just in time for us to really get kicking in on the memory care one. So any thoughts or questions on projects that we have coming?
So timeline on the memory care, you expect to have drawings in the spring for the board, for the
I
committee?
think that's the time frame we're shooting on. I should have brought the construction schedule with me because Tom Burrows has got it all laid out all the way down to approval going out, but yeah.
Well, it's a whole new board.
What's that?
That's likely a whole new board.
Yeah, it will be,
Yeah.
And new committee too.
The only request I have, once you have the ribbon cutting ceremony for memory care, could you please send me an invitation?
Yeah, we could do that.
I would like to be there.
You should.
Absolutely.
We've come a long way. We should feel all very proud that we're going to get this done. But that's my only request. I feel sad because I'm not going to see it happen.
Actually, I think that it should be extended to everybody to kick the project off, right?
Yeah.
So whether they're on this committee or not at that
It's a
juncture.
team
So, yeah.
effort.
I think it's a fair request.
So my final part of that question is so next spring that'll be to the board, new board at that time, basically to work through in the approval. When would you expect to let the bidding out for the actual building?
Shortly, right after approval.
Right after the approval?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe start in the fall.
Because they're already looking to get the construction manager on board with the project from early junctures, so.
Okay.
So what do you think the completion date, tentative completion date for the?
Honestly, it would be a guess, but you gotta be looking at 2024. At least, yeah.
With all the exciting projects, do you anticipate more interest and then therefore more residents? Then do you have a plan?
Well, that's kind of where we were talking about on the census side, right? We are right now, phones are ringing, and we have a ton of interest. The problem we're running into is that bumping up against available staffing. I think right now, if we had enough staffing to do the whole building, we could probably fill it. The problem is we just don't have people. So.
with the new projects and then even the completion of the project, so, I mean, do we have a plan? The project,
Right now, we're right up against where we need to be from a total overall census standpoint to take those 2 hallways offline and have it be no impact at all.
okay,
So we've kind of set the census at 80 to 85. That then takes the 2 hallways out of service. So if we needed them, we have them, but we're gonna have to take them offline. It would be real hard then to fill them right now. And then
right.
6 months from now, go, okay, now we gotta get them all the way down, and you're telling the hospitals you're not taking admissions for weeks. So we're right there, and when we built the budget off of that number for the next fiscal year.
Okay, so basically, we're gonna have this amount of time to sort of hopefully increase the staff, and then once one of the projects or the phases are done, we can possibly bring more residents in at that point?
Yep, yeah.
A lot of unknowns, huh?
There's a lot of unknowns on that.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, Tom.
Okay, in the back of your packet, I gave you all a copy of the strategic plan report card. That's just kind of, it's our internal strategic plan, and I brought it to you guys about a quarter ago, so we try to update it quarterly, and my leadership team gets together and we talk through where we're at. We're getting ready to wrap this one up when we get to the end of the calendar year, and a new one will be done for the next 2-year period. So projects that are not completed will get built into the next one, but you guys will get one more update on this one before the new one comes out, and it'll be right at the end of the year. So most projects are still on track, which is a feat in itself, given everything going on, but you know, the next year focus will be a lot more on the recovery side, or the next strategic plan we put together on the recovery side and organizational health side. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. And then the last thing I just wanted to make note of, because I didn't want it to just be a throwaway comment in an IDPH section of the report, we did receive notification a couple weeks ago that the CMS, or the federal side of the survey process, was assessing a fine at that $37,000, I think was the number. That goes all the way back to the survey we had in 2020 for the 2021 for the COVID outbreak in 2020. Just finally the federal side caught up with that. We did pay a state fine for that, which was paid, I think, in 2021 at the end of the year. And so I don't know why it took so long for this one to come through, but we have already sent in the process for it to be paid on time to get that fine squared away, and that should be the last thing hanging out from the COVID outbreak from the beginning of the COVID pandemic. One of the things that Board Member Meshes was talking or referring to is the state reports. That one will be included so you guys can actually see the full state report, our responses back to them in that packet that I'll send to you in the next 24, 48 hours. Just give me a little bit of time to pull some of them together. So, and I'll send it to you guys in chunks so you can see it. So you'll get that survey and then just the current stuff. I'm not going to fill in the gap because it'll become almost too much reading. But I figured that would be important to note since there is a fine attached to it. That's all I had for my report, Madam Chair.
Jim?
On that fine, have, across the state, is there a lot of nursing homes that got fines? And were we on the lower side of that, or is it?
We were probably, at the time, we felt we were on the high end of the fine scale, but it kind of balanced itself out through the pandemic. This was our first COVID outbreak, so it was the very first one we had. We had an infection preventionist that was looking at how we moved residents who started testing positive and their roommates, and instead of splitting them, we were putting them into isolation together. The state and the federal government wanted them split, and so that's where they got us for. I will tell you that looking back on it today, I still would have kept the roommates together because that's why it got out of control, right? So you take somebody that's exposed, you move them in with somebody that's not, now you've exposed that person, and then you split them again. And we were, at one point in time, we were doing room changes every single day to the tune of moving 5 to 10 people because of the way that the state wanted it to be done. So we ended up The state surveyor even acknowledged during that survey that she did agree with the approach and why we did it that way. However, the guidelines said, and this was back when there was a lot of debate between the word guidelines, requirements, and recommendations. And we took a guideline as a guideline, not a requirement, and the state and the federal government looked at it as a requirement, not a guideline. So that's where we got caught up. So you'll see it in the report. When the report comes out, you'll see this entire thing.
This is kind of a joke, but maybe we can use ARPA money to pay for that fine, because it was just, to me, a bullshit fine. Government put that on to us. I think we ought to let them pay for it themselves.
Jeff and then Connie, okay?
Was the state's position that we should have isolated the roommates each individually?
So we should have separated them to keep like a COVID positive person and then a person under suspicion in separate
Yeah.
rooms.
But isolated.
But isolated, yeah. And one of the challenges that it also presented is the availability of rooms in your building, because at that point in time, I think we were at 98% occupancy. So there's not a lot of flexibility on
Right.
how you move them, so ended up putting pairs together. We believe that it exacerbated the problem that we had in the building because of all the room changes that were being done. But again, guidelines were separated.
Connie?
This doesn't have anything to do with the previous fine structure that we were trying to appeal this month, does it?
No, that was something totally different.
Okay.
Because we appealed this back in 2021 with the state of Illinois.
Okay.
Or, I'm sorry, we waived our right to the appeal, so we can take a reduction in the fine. Because
Okay.
at the time when we looked at it, did you have COVID? Yeah, you had COVID in your building. Okay, well, how are you going to win on that account? So we took the reduction. You're referring to the fines for the staffing, and that was all, we got a letter, rescinded it all back. We did have to put a plan of correction in for the 4.6 hours, but there was no fine in that, so we ended up not having to deal with that at all.
Oh, okay.
In 2 more quarters, that will come back live.
We have to do it every quarter
Yeah.
until, okay, thank you.
Yep. So for now, no, you don't have to worry about that.
Any other questions? All right. Now we're, personnel updates. Update on the state reports, personnel.
And I think that was just acknowledging that I'm going to be sending those out to you
It's all
guys.
folded in, okay. All right, I don't want to leave anything off. Budget reviews. Here you go.
All right. So this is the first time that I've done a PowerPoint for the budget presentation in all the years that I've brought budgets forward. And I toyed around with how in-depth we take this, but I wanted to give you a real understanding, at least at the ground level, of the challenges that were presented to build this budget, and then also kind of what to expect as the year goes forward. And just some of the different things that may or may not be taken into consideration. No. You want me to do it by hand?
Try one more time, please.
How about I come over there and just do it by hand? That's all right. All good. Gives me the cheat for the next spring, or next slide anymore. So, all right. This year's budget projections were really difficult, and let me try to detail out for you some of the things that we had to look at as we were building the budget. Unfunded mandates, you'll see that in the supplemental request, but the bed tax, nursing home bed tax, for example, went up by $220,000 for next year. That, whether or not we budgeted for it, the state was going to make us pay for it. So we had unfunded mandates that we had to bake into the budget document. We are still dealing with the ongoing COVID mitigation related expenses. Biggest expense is all the PPE that we are still burning through every single day in the building, masks, gowns, N95 masks, most staff are still having to wear an N95 mask. Testing, we are still doing in-house testing of staff weekly. Some staff are being tested twice a week. All of those are expenses that we're continuing to incur, and the cost of those supplies is certainly not coming down. Inflation, trying to figure out what food costs are going to be for the next budget year has been a significant challenge, and there's no consistency between the inflationary number of beef versus the inflationary number of chicken, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of that here in a minute. Supply chain disruptions and availability. We are seeing having to make decisions on the fly of products that we would normally use that are no longer available or are on back order, and so we're having to go to secondary products or different vendors to get those kinds of things, and then the delays to get that delivered to us. So we're having to kind of look ahead, keep additional supplies on hand, order a little bit heavier at times so that we can try to avoid any disruption in the supply chain, and you'll see some of those numbers baked in. Just overall cost increase. And I'll kind of demonstrate some of those then and nows for you guys so you can get a feel for what we're seeing on the supply side. Staffing availability and market wages. The biggest challenge, and I'm going to talk more about that here in a second, that we're going to have next year is not going to be inflation, it's not going to be census, it's going to be staff. Being able to fill our shifts, and I'll explain to you all the impacts here in a second. And then energy costs. As energy costs continue to go up, our ability to try to reduce our energy utilization is not that easy. We've already gone through that process years ago where we went and retrofitted the entire building to be energy efficient. So where we're at today from an energy utilization is probably where we're going to stay at going forward. You know, you still got to run the washers, you still got to keep the lights on, you're still going to use the same amount of water, you're still going to use the same amount of gas to do the cooking. The only difference is the cost to provide those services is going up significantly. So the challenges, like I mentioned, the biggest challenge we're going to have is building our staffing back. It impacts our ability to build the census. It impacts our cost on agencies. So we're kind of running into that catch-22 where I've inched the census upward, but now I'm going to have to rely a little bit more on supplemental agency staffing, which comes to us at a premium cost. Market pressures. Right now, with the minimum wage increases and the way that the job market is, the cost or the pay rate for a CNA is on par with the cost of somebody working at Costco, Portillo's. You know, when you see the signs that say entry-level positions starting at $19 an hour, well, that's basically entry-level positions for CNAs. Why would you go into a field that you're actually going to really have to work when for the same amount of money you can go into a field that is not as mentally and physically taxing and challenging? A couple other examples of market pressures is housekeeping, and I've talked to you guys a little bit about this in the past, but a housekeeper has basically 4 avenues that they can go into, but the pay rate is relatively the same. Office work, school work, healthcare, and homes, and I'll throw a 5th one in and let's go with hotels, right? So they can go into any of those fields. Well, the healthcare or long-term care field, you've got to wear a mask, you've got to be tested, you got to have there's the vaccine mandates. Where are they going to choose to work? Well, the road of less restriction, which would be all those other fields like hotels and schools and homes versus coming into long-term care. So it's not, when I say staffing, we're not just talking about the CNAs and nurses, but the support staff that help us do the the little things and keep the facility clean and whatnot. So it's the whole thing that comes together. Some additional challenges that we see coming in next year is just vendor pressure. We talked a little bit about product and service availability, but the ability to honor contracts. That has been a big challenge in the last year when we've had long-term contracts that we initiated in pre-COVID, and so our pricing was really good, and the ability for vendors to honor that. For example, we lost a long-time dairy provider because he just could no longer honor the contract pricing and then be able to even renegotiate because he couldn't get enough volume due to changes locally. So that's just an example of that. we're seeing freight fees and fuel costs added to almost everything we buy. And even though we try to, work those out of the contracts and the purchasing department tries to write those into the POs that we're not gonna pay those, you run into a situation where, well, that's fine, but then you're not gonna get the product, right? And we're not at the liberty of saying, okay, well then just don't send it. A lot of times we have to incur those additional costs. Vendor availability, like I just mentioned. A lot of vendors are leaving the market space. That limits competition, but it also limits the availability to do the shopping that we do. So one of the things that we planned for is that all of our significant vendor contracts are in the final year. So that means we have to bid food. That one we are at the subject of the new market. And we already know that food vendors are going to hedge the inflationary costs for the next 3 years if they're getting into a 3-year contract. So we would expect to see a big, significant numbers jump from the current contracts we're in to the ones that will get bidded out. Medical supplies, same thing. We're going to have to go back out this year. Oxygen, all of those types of things are going to be subject to the market. And we've been able to take advantage of having those long-term contracts and exercising the option years to keep those contracts in place. We're at that end where we're going to be subject to the market. And I just threw up some numbers so you guys can kind of get a feel for some of the changes in just the cost. And I just randomly picked a few items that was real easy to go, okay, this item number has not changed, so I can give you a pure apples to apples. Just gloves, for example, $31 a case pre-COVID, $101.95 a case today. Utilization of that doesn't decrease, so you're eating that $70 increase every single time you order gloves, and we order them by the 10s and 20s of cases a week. So kind of gives you an idea of where some of these pressure points are coming from. Ground beef, a case of ground beef back, pre-COVID, $69. Now you're looking at an $82, per case. Utilization does go down a little bit because census is down, but you're still having to create, the menu gets adjusted, but we're still having to make, enough variety in the menu. Sometimes in the past, you'd be able to hedge when things would go on with food. So like if you had a bird flu case where they were culling a lot of the herd and chicken prices spiked, you can kind of move over to a little bit more beef, a little bit more pork. Right now, we're seeing an increase in every single one of our protein lines, whether it's eggs, chicken, beef, pork, doesn't matter. So just trying to give you guys a little bit of a feel for that. Okay, into the actual budget document itself. Some of the FY 2022 highlights that I just wanted to bring to you guys' attention. We have adjusted the case mix and the facility staffing levels, kind of try to right size the building. You guys have been a part of a lot of those resolutions that have come forward. We initiated the therapy room expansion project, including the shower room and dining room refresh. It will be 95% complete by the time we get to the end of the year, but there will still be a few items to hang out. They'll be hanging out there, so I didn't say completed. We have initiated the memory care unit project design and development, and we continue to just look at the organization on a regular basis to find ways to be more efficient. Looking at ways to boost our staff in the different departments that are hurting without kind of getting creative, right? The universal worker has become a significant piece of how we get through our day. Unfortunately, they do not count in your minimum staffing. So we have talked a little bit a second ago about the staffing fines and whatnot. It'd be awesome if the state and the federal government would allow us to count all of the universal workers that we have in the building. At any given time, we could have 5 to 10 of them that don't get counted into the mix. Before I jump forward, are there any of the 22 highlights that you wanted me to speak to a little bit more? All right.
Anyone?
So let's talk about our goals for next year. These are not all of them that are in the budget. These are the ones I wanted to just highlight. We need to continue to monitor and adjust the operation that's going to be caused by the challenges. You saw on the slide I brought forward, they're anticipating this year, at the end of the year, that there will be 400 nursing homes across the country that close their doors. And that is, staffing is the driver of that. And it's important to note that because that doesn't take into account how many will be sold and change hands. And just looking around our local area, that's happening a lot. The buildings are changing hands and being sold. So the challenges are out there, are real, and we're going to need to adjust based on those challenges that keep coming forward. We're going to continue to work on that memory care unit development. That is a project that will stay forward focused. Continue to evaluate for opportunities to enhance revenues and increase efficiencies. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. And then the key here is increase the available staffing so that we can continue to move the census forward. 75 is a kind of a tight spot for us to get to 80, 85 like we need. We're going to need to add at least one more night nurse and one more PM nurse. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's just too challenging on the staff to be able to manage that. Go ahead.
Yeah, go back to the
Yep.
goals there. Work with county board on the memory care unit development. I don't know why I feel that we're kind of stuck in the mud on that. I just, that almost could have been 1-2 years ago. You know what I'm saying? And the other thing I wanted to ask about too, and kind of dovetailing it, per the county strategic plan, eliminate or evaluate opportunities for future operational savings, including public-private partnerships. What would those look like?
Well, we already have quite a few public-private partnerships when it comes to provision of services, right? So let's just use therapy as a perfect example. All of our therapy staff are a private company that we bring in to provide said services. So there is a partnership at that level, but most of them are medical partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I could go down all kinds of x-ray. So that's, we have a service that comes in, a private company that we're not staffing agencies. For us, those are where we find public-private partnerships per se. On the medical side, I'm not sure of any other ones that we can bring in at this point.
I'm just concerned because since we are going into a transition period, I mean, some of these goals could literally lead us in separate directions or in two different directions with regard to future Valley High. And they would still be feasible looking backward into time because, we said we were going to do this here. And that concerns me because, again, I feel like we're slow on the development side of the memory care, and I feel like it's still out there in the potential wasteland that we might end up not doing this after all. That's my big concern.
So what about, could we do the wording in a different way instead of work with the
For
county?
posterity's sake, something to that effect.
Because we've already done some of that work.
Right,
And isn't that where you're going with
Yes.
this, Jeff?
yes.
And so maybe it's work with the county board with the ongoing memory care unit. Does that help? Does that strengthen it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it does to the extent that it provides
Because we're moving forward.
a point of continuity rather than, you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
do.
concerned about setting goals that are ambiguous when we
Yeah.
know what our goal is.
And we've already made movement.
Right.
We've already gone forward, but it looks like this is like a static statement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? So is there some way we could reword it in a way that,
What I mentioned to Tom is what you have in your packet is a little softer language than what Tom has on the board here, in my opinion. You've got it, and Tom's got it on his goal, says continue the discussion.
Discussion,
Perhaps that, what Member Thorsten's saying, we don't want to continue the discussion, we want to move it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what Tom has written up here is a little bit more like, we're moving it, we're done, we've made the decision, we're gonna work with the county board to develop the memory care unit.
you're right, it says here, work with the county board to continue the discussion
We can add a little crispness to what's in the
on the
packet.
feasibility of, we've already,
Yeah.
that feasibility has gone out the barn.
Interesting.
We're somewhere else.
We can tighten that up.
Can you reword it?
Yep.
To be more of an affirmative statement.
Yeah, because future boards and future committees, I think when they look back, I just want to make sure that they know our intent clearly.
were very quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we'll fix that up.
Unfortunately, to that point, a future board could come in and shut this
They
down
could.
if you had a bunch of anti.
They could, but that's why I
None
want
would
to, and that's
care.
another reason why I want them to feel that if we're not in an ambiguous mode of thinking here, that we are very definite in what our goals are, you know, and where we are today, and recognize where we are today, as far as the feasibility part of it.
We'll tighten that up.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other thoughts on goals? Okay, well, let's get into the numbers a little bit. FTEs, they remained essentially flat, I would venture to say. I know Carrie had mentioned that to me that the FY22 was a little overcalculated for registry, but for the most part, we have remained flat as far as the FTEs go. And then personnel, do you want to real quickly just help me understand what you meant by the IMRF and health insurance have changes reflected?
So the IMRF rate went down for this next fiscal year, so that obviously reduces personnel. Health insurance has gone up, so it's hard to say, but those are the biggest impacts.
Okay.
So what is the percentage point are you building into healthcare, what you may predict of the increase in the budget?
So the
It's about 8.5.
8.5 PPOs staying flat.
Okay.
But also too, it's not just the increase, but it's, you know, if you have someone that didn't have health insurance last year, but they choose to take, like, the highest plan we have, I think the county's cost per year is in the high 20,000. So if you have a few people that are shifting, that impacts it as well.
Go ahead.
Do we, this might be a two-hour question, what percent are we fully staffed at this point?
You know, let me get you that actual percentage.
Okay.
It's gonna be by department. So I have some departments that are fully staffed. I have other departments that, I would say housekeeping probably falls somewhere in the 70%. We could use some more housekeepers, but nursing is gonna be a number that I couldn't even pull off the top of my head, but I can get you that number.
And then the other question I have about management. If we never got full housekeeping staff, is that gonna keep our numbers down? Does the number of housekeepers dictate, have anything to do with? But
That's really-
obviously we need
Yeah.
skilled care, the skilled nursing in order to have residents. But does housekeeping and the dietary portion, does that also impact being able to take on fulfilling our census?
So dietary is, I would say, a part-time person away from being fully staffed. So
Oh,
that is
okay.
one of my, that's why I said it's by department,
Yeah,
right?
right,
That's
yeah,
one of
yeah.
my most stable departments.
Okay.
This is where the universal workers come in. So I have a high school student who comes to work 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock,
Mhm.
2 days a week, universal worker. So they help backfill into where, you know, if we didn't have enough housekeepers for the day, they can help backfill into that. The other thing is it's kind of our bridge into the RA program, which then we train them to be able to feed residents and help in the dining rooms and do some light CNA work. And then we move them through, and so it's kind of that, get them in at a universal worker level and work them through the CNA program, and we kind of stay with them the whole way. And we were starting to turn some of our initial group into CNAs at this point, so it took a lot of time to seed it, bear fruit and whatnot.
Right.
But a universal worker might be a housekeeper today, they might be a dietary person working in the dining room tomorrow, they might be helping transport residents back and forth from an activity or event going on. It could be anything of all, and they understand that when they come in. So that's kind of how we've been able to manage the support positions for now.
Okay.
But it's a good question.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, on the revenue side. So what we did is we based all of our revenue numbers on 80 residents in the building. So that's kind of that spot now that we're going to sit at until the memory care project gets finished. So between 80 85 is really pushing it, but that's our full, and we're gonna air quote, full number for now. Our current census right now is 75, like we talked about a little while ago, so we believe that those targets are realistic, and that's why we use them as our numbers. How we arrived at the case mix of the revenue projections is we just took the county board approved case mix for 120, we put that into a percentage, and then applied it back to 80. So our case mix stays the same, and we can talk about case mix at a later time, and we all saw what pulling the levers does with case mix as far as revenues and whatnot. But for building the budget purposes, we used what is currently approved and agreed upon on the books. So that's projecting a $12,201,940 budget, and we are anticipating a private resident room rate increase. Now, that's on a very small number of the overall residents, so it's not a huge windfall, but it is worth noting. Years past, we would do 2 increases during the year, a $5 one on January 1 and a $5 increase on July 1. This year, we built it on 10 and 10, but we may need to go a little bit higher than that depending on what the market looks like. So something that we typically will do a room rate survey as we get towards the fall, so we're kind of right about that time, and that'll help inform us as to what we want to do for January 1 and July 1, and that'll come before this committee as a resolution to make that change. So we're anticipating it, it's built in to be a little higher than normal, but we'll see what the market looks like when we get to that point.
Is Medicaid and Medicare increasing their reimbursement rates?
Yes, and that's built into our revenue projections. And that also is kind of the trade-off for the supplemental request for the $220,000 for the bed tax increase. Well, the bed tax increase is used to fund the Medicaid rate increase. So you're paying for it on one side, it does come back on the other, not dollar for dollar, but that's kind of how it works. Expenses wise, we used industry expected inflationary factors for everything that we could. We did hedge a little bit in some of our areas that maybe the industry I think is a little low. I think food is going to be projected higher than what they're projecting, and we built that in. Medical supplies, we built that in. You know, I was telling Chair Jensen and Member Meshes earlier this morning when we talked a little bit, just things you don't think about. The cost of basic first aid, Band-Aids, gauze, ever since the Ukraine war started, those costs now and availability have changed. So, you know, we adjusted and inflated that, figuring that that's something, that conflict is going to expand. So we kind of did as much as we can, but we built it all in on the expense side. Then we looked at areas in which purchases could be delayed or adjusted. An example would be every year we buy 2 new patient lifts, and we use that to cycle them out. We're not going to do that this year with the lower census. You know, we can use what we have. We can delay that purchase. It's not going to impact the operation at all, but it's just an extra $10,000 that we're not going to spend. So we looked at all of those things as well. So we're projecting about let's just go with $12 million in expenses this year, with an additional $600,000 in supplemental requests. And I'm going to walk you guys through those individually. So, any questions about the numbers at that level?
I have a question. So, excuse me, when you, when you take away the lift, you don't buy a lift this year, and you postpone that payment, does that pose any liability? Because, you know, now that lift is a year into use, 3 years into use. I don't know, you know. When I started, thinking that there's so many times it's going to function correctly,
correct,
and it's going to fail.
So when I started, we put the program in place that we were going to use that as our aging out. And we bought a bunch of lifts 10, 12 years ago, and now we've been every 2 years replacing them. So that part, they're all functional, they're all within their lifespan, they all are on preventative maintenance and whatnot. But when the census came down, we have lifts that we took out of service because we didn't have the bed need to support the use. So those have not had the wear and tear that you would anticipate. In fact, we have a brand new lift that has never been used sitting downstairs because it didn't get put into service. So there's no increased liability. I don't believe that, if I didn't even bring it up as far as this, nobody on the staff side's even gonna notice that it didn't happen this year. So it won't be a non-impact, other than the numbers and the budgetary thing. Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
How much money do you think is being saved? Well, how much are we delaying? Do you have a value amount that we're delaying?
You know, I probably should have calculated all of that. No, because we looked at different things that were wants versus needs. So the way we build the budget is I have all my department heads give it all. I want to know what you want, I want to know what you need, and then we looked at the wants and said to some of them, okay, well, some of the stuff for activities, supply-wise, we can delay that. You know, those are, you know, more wants. Needs are all in. So we make sure that everybody gets everything that they need, and then we might delay some office equipment, stuff like, you know, something along those lines. You know, for next year's budget, I'll keep a track of that, because that's a great question, because it'd be nice to see. So I will do that. All right, so let me walk you guys through the supplemental requests, kind of what the plans are here. We are at the end of life for a lot of our electronic medical records equipment. So these pieces of equipment fall outside of the county IT contract for computers and whatnot. We are looking at a replacement cost of about $40,000, and that includes software licenses and setup fees. We baked in a 15% increase in medical supply costs. I'm trying to hedge what we think that new contract's going to come in. That's one of the ones where we're hearing from a lot of our medical suppliers that the contract that we've been in is definitely way below where they're going to be at. So we hedged that a little bit. We have 2 scales, one on each floor, that are at the end of their useful life. And rather than buy just regular scales, which we have, what we would like to do is get scales that integrate right into the electronic medical record. So what that does is it eliminates transcription errors from a CNA writing the weight down, going over to the computer, typing it in. Here, now the scale would just automatically just put it right in. So saves on staff time, saves on errors. And given the fact that we have moved to almost integrated all of our equipment, this is the time to bring the scales into that fold. The gloves increase. I showed you guys that on the front, on one of the front sides of the scale. We just need to account for the fact that that cost is not changing anytime soon. You know, petroleum costs, as long as they continue to go up, gloves are going to continue to go up, and then you have the supply chain issue with that. Tom Burrows and I worked through the utilities, heat and gas, and we're projecting that an increase of $50,000 in our utility costs is going to be needed for the next fiscal year. Bed tax, we've talked a lot about that already, but that's one of those unfunded mandates that we had talked a little bit about. And then therapy. So every budget year, what we do is we sit down and look at how our therapy expenses are going to be, you know, how they're going to change. Our utilization of physical, speech, and occupational therapy has gone way up. Now we can attribute part of that to the therapy gym space allowing us the capacity to being able to do that. We also, like we talked about early in the meeting, our phone is ringing from referrals from the hospital, and so that increases our utilization. Now, the reason I gave this its own slide is because therapy utilization, yes, the costs go up, but the reimbursement goes up with it, and that is also baked in on the other side of the equation as well. So those are our supplemental requests. Those numbers are kind of where we see the next year going in some of those key factor areas. All the other increases that are expected, we were able to bake in, and that way we can bring you guys forward a relatively balanced budget as far as the supplemental goes. And then the last 2 key things that I'll leave with you guys before I open it up for questions. The key in our budget to recover is it's got to be, and I've said it enough times and I cannot press upon it enough, we've got to get staffing stabilized and rebuilt to our functional levels. And that in itself will help improve our overall organizational health. And cost monitoring and control are going to be an ongoing focus as we kind of get into these new inflationary numbers. So with that, I'll open it up to you guys.
Steve and then Teresa.
Okay. I mean, great presentation. I mean, it's so very easy to understand. I guess my only comment would be, we had this little bit, this dovetails into transportation, and I think some of the finance talk for the, you know, the next meeting there too, but it's that supplemental designation. I mean, I would argue we don't have a balanced budget at this point, because there's some supplementals on here that they're not an option. You know, they're a given, you have to include that in your cost. Hence, you know, the budget really isn't balanced at this point, and that's not your fault.
No, I can
Okay, so I mean, I will go to that you know, we have to come to a way at the county, and it worked. I mean, Pete brought that up, you know, with transportation. You know, it's not a flaw in the system, it's just the way the system has worked for years. That's how the county has looked at the budgets, but we're in a totally different cycle now, where these supplementals, they're not supplemental. You know, he needs gloves. You know, that has to be in the budget. That's not something we can say, no, Tom, you're not going to. You know, so what are you gonna, he's gonna reuse gloves, you know? So, you know, so I guess that's my only comment. It's a great, I mean, it's a great starting point at this point. You've done a fabulous job. It's very explanatory, but, you know, I take deference to the supplemental word now, as we're starting to look at the budgets this cycle. There's truly gonna be supplementals in every budget that aren't an option.
And I guess the question is, how do we triage that?
Right.
In other departments, and how do we prioritize that? Because like you said, gloves are high priority. You have to have gloves to do the work, so.
And I know Kevin's already doing work, as he's gonna be coming to us with other presentations on the revenue side of, you know, are we flat levies, you know, are we, so, but I mean, that truly, it's a challenge this year. This is gonna be the most challenging budget that the county has faced in quite a few years.
That's true.
I gotta tell you, in all the years that I've been doing budgeting in the county, this was the one that took the most work. You know, meeting with the staff, trying to figure out, you know, where are we going to be? So yeah, different approach this year.
Teresa?
Excuse my ignorance. How's the bed tax calculated by the state?
So we pay based on occupied beds, and it's census driven. And so, it's all of that minus short-term rehab, so Medicare is not included in that, so it's all the rest of your occupied beds. We know what those numbers are on a regular basis, so we already know how to basically project it forward. So then what happens is we send our census data to the state, and quarterly we pay our bed tax. That then gets applied to the federal government. There's a program called FMAP. I don't remember exactly what all of the acronyms are, but the federal government then sends the money back at a matching percentage to the state of Illinois to help fund Medicaid. Hospitals do it too.
Okay, so we get, hospitals and long-term care facilities get taxed for how much from their occupancy, but not for Medicaid, not for Medicare.
Not for Medicare.
For patients. And that money goes to the federal government, and it comes back to the state, to pay for Medicaid.
I won't call you or say what I think it is, but you can go ahead and draw your own conclusions.
Okay.
It's been, that system has been like that since I've been in the field, and it's always been a way to help fund the Medicaid increases in Illinois. So we've been through many different bed tax ideations, but this one is significant, and that ties back. We're already incurring this cost in our current budget year, which we did not plan for, because that changed with the new Medicaid reimbursement system on July 1.
So they raised your tax rate.
Significant.
So what was the rate before? Was it now?
It was calculated totally different, so the rate was different.
Okay.
Yeah, I could show you a historical breakdown of how it all, it's interesting how it's changed, but yeah, it changed on July 1. We are getting paid more though, so I mean, you're gonna incur one on one side and it's gonna come back close to being even on the other.
So the supplemental here is put in here, but it's not, we actually think we're gonna get most of that money back through Medicaid.
Well, it's gonna come back on the revenue side, but no, that is a new cost that we have to account for.
All right, this won't be balanced out. The 220 will not be balanced out by
We're not gonna get 220 back. Because that's 220 above what we were paying currently. It's not, 220 is your total
Right, yeah, no, I realize,
Yeah.
some amount, yeah, you're adding, it's more, you have to increase, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big number, what we pay in taxes for occupied beds.
Bob,
My question is the staffing. It's brought up, you mentioned it a half a dozen times, if not more. I don't see increases in that unless I'm missing it. So, you know, you say there's a lack of staffing because you can't hire people, they'd rather go working at Walmart or wherever. So have you figured out what it costs to increase, you know, I guess the hourly rates, you know, what that would cost? Because if we're looking at expansion, then, you know, all those factors are gonna come into play.
So we do that twice a year.
Yeah.
We typically will do it right after the first of the year, and then we'll do it sometime in the spring. We did a significant change in nursing wages.
October.
It was October, okay, I was gonna say October, and then I was gonna check myself. In October, and then there's already built-in projection of an increase depending on what the county board decides for all non-union employees. When we do it again in the spring, to see how kind of the market, that comes as a separate resolution to you guys if we have to make an adjustment. Now, as far as the overall, when we talk about increasing the amount of staff, this budget is built with this being fully staffed. So those costs don't get incurred if we don't staff up to that. So it's not that we need to increase the total number of staff in the budget, we got to increase the total number of staff available up to those levels, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I was under the impression that you're having a hard time filling staff like for cleaning and laundry and like hotels and a lot of other facilities are doing. So then you use outside services to supplement that, is from what I gather.
Just, the only thing we use supplemental services for is nursing,
Just for nurses?
just for nursing.
So if you have to wash bed sheets and you don't have enough people to wash bed sheets, then how is that?
Universal worker.
Universal.
We will use one of our universal workers that day.
And that's your part-time? Okay. So you somehow fill that gap that way?
We've been lucky enough to do it so far.
Yeah. So what if your luck runs out? Is there, are you figuring any increases in cost? You know, like, hey, I gotta pay these people $5 more an hour, so I can get a full staff, you know, 40 hours a week.
At that point, it'd have to come before you guys as a separate resolution. I
Wouldn't that be, though, proposed in a budget? I don't know, maybe I look to you, Peter. Because if you need that, isn't that something they would kind of budget for?
Well, I think,
You know, I mean, and you know, I know wages are tough. It took a lot.
you know about this isn't the only area where we're struggling to hire.
Correct.
We talked at transportation committee right now, we are 7 down in our maintenance crew. We're 7 down in the circuit clerk's office right now. So there's a balance we're all gonna have to walk together about how much money are we gonna pay, you know, to get people in the door, and the equilibrium that upsets with all of your current employees. And so we gotta, I think, try and fight through this for the time being until we find out what the new normal is. But you did say, and I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but you did say, you know, we're short-staffed for the expansion. Remember, we're not expanding Valley High.
Right, I know.
We're kind of retooling the resident that we're gonna be serving, so we aren't gonna have more beds, in fact, probably have a few less.
Couple less.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the, I think, good things about the decision that this county board made, you know, was to kind of take this half step towards the memory care unit. So we're not talking about needing more, we're just talking about filling what we have.
Yes, you're right. I guess I was thinking of it in different terms. So, we just went through, you know, a total evaluation of dollar values, pay increases
Yeah.
for everybody, just 2 months ago, it's something.
July 1 was implementation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
Tom,
a little.
the Valley High staff went a little bit earlier, there was an adjustment last October.
Yeah. So I know this is off key from here, but are you thinking of that again? Because this seems to be a continuing problem. You hear about it constantly in the news, just all the time. They're just having a hard time getting people to work. And what is it gonna take, and I guess it's anybody's guess, but is it money, Sometimes you can throw money at it all day long and it's not gonna work. Maybe there's other things, other packages, other, gifts, vacation, I don't know, it's a whole new world, it seems every day, you wake up,
It is, and I go back, we can't, in this world of public sector, we can't jump too dramatically in any one direction.
Right.
We're criticized for being not very nimble sometimes, and I think that's probably accurate, because we can't move too fast in our environment, it's a challenge. We are gonna keep our eyes on it, but, to your point about, trying to do things differently, we haven't talked about this a lot yet, with the county board, but Tom and I have talked a little bit about it, Catherine and I have talked about maybe some different ways to pay people. In particular, some of our lower earners, in the housekeeping arena, this model that you don't get paid until every other Friday. That's not the way it works in a lot of areas now. There's different ways of using technology that we might want to explore, and we actually have an RFQ, I think, that we're going to have out on the street on Friday, looking at some different ways to compensate people as a way of attracting and retaining.
Okay.
Not necessarily more money, but faster money.
Right. Well, there's all kind of ways.
I can tell you that will be received well. This last week was the first time in a long, long time that I had multiple staff come and say, I need overtime, I missed my rent. So we are getting to a new world.
Yeah, and I guess it could be done a lot of different ways, flexible hours, different.
The retail and hospitality industry, food service industry, they're paying people a lot differently now, and I think we need to bring ourselves up to modern ways, because we're competing with them in some respects.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Jim, anything to say? Okay. Jim, you have a-
Okay. I'm not a great numbers guy here. I don't know if I'm reading this right. So I had some questions on, when I'm looking at the Fund 800 on the revenues and expenditures, comparisons to 21 to 22 to 23 projected. And Valley High, of course, has an excess fund balance, but when I'm looking at the expenditures on 22, are there expenditure or revenues, I should say, like right now through 8 months, you were 4,900,000, 4,970,000, and are there revenues? So if you equate that out per month and then annualize that, our revenues from what we appropriated for 22 are off a lot. It misses the mark by $5 or $6 million for revenues. And then same way on expenses, it misses the mark, but the expenses are only like $1 million, $1.5 million off if you annualize them. So our fund balance is way off. Am I looking at that wrong?
So part of it is the utilization of fund balance that you're looking at.
We're gonna utilize about $5.5 million of your reserve.
Oh, yeah.
Am I right? Am I looking at this wrong?
Yeah.
I think that maybe our bonus is how far behind are you in your revenues, in receiving the revenue?
not as bad as it has been, but there is a lot of receivables that are.
So let me get the exact.
That's what I'm
because
asking.
They're behind, I think, due to their payer mix. So I will get, it's 8 months in the general ledger, but it may not be.
It might
8
only be
months.
6 months worth of.
That's what I'm asking, if we have something to really be
It will
concerned
tighten-
about here.
yeah,
And what
as
are
we
we
get closer, it
expecting?
tightens
What is our
back up.
receivable?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because on the books, it looks like garbage. If that's,
The other thing is, under that line of utilization of fund balance, even as the year goes is completed, you'll never see an actual amount there, because that net loss is just basically the utilization of fund balance. So when you say the 7 million, is that line of the 7.5 million that we have budgeted plus the 3.8 million of utilization of fund balance. So one way to look at it is that under actual 8 months, you'll never see transactions under that line item, because that's a budgetary line item only. It doesn't have transactions as we go throughout the year.
so let's look at 21, which is actual numbers. In 21, we had revenues of 8,600,000. And our actual was actual in expenditures was 11,300,000, rounded up. Okay? So our fund balance went down by that difference. So that is an actual number there, our fund balance that we're burning up in 21, COVID's in there. We burned up a lot of that money, but I thought we had COVID money come back and replace a lot of that.
That's reflected in here.
Where?
It's gotta be intergovernmental, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 6,589,000?
Yeah. But it was only,
850,000.
yeah.
So 850 was not ARPA, but the other money, okay, the
Right.
replacement. So even if that's reflected in there, we had even a bigger burn rate because that 850 wasn't in there. How close are you gonna come in 22? Then that, we really need to know that receivable every month of how much we're owed if it's not reflecting in our books because it's,
I think you presented the monthly.
Yeah, it's on the monthly
Yeah.
report. The June one is attached to the administrator's report.
what page would that be on?
It would be right after, so it's page 7.
And it's listed as what?
So the months on the top are wrong, you just got June 2021, should be June 2022, is what
Did
you're
I
saying?
pull the wrong report? I might have, yeah. I grabbed the wrong one and attached it, so that's not gonna, we can't look at that as,
So that's not correct either.
no. No, let me give you, hang on. Pete, can I have my computer?
I don't know, is my questioning,
No, it's.
Makes
it's-
sense.
I'm gonna dovetail that, I have an ask too. It's
Go ahead while
not
I'm
really
pulling
related,
this
but
up.
it is related because I think another very helpful thing, I mean, I'm looking at the Valley High fund strength trending. I think it would really be helpful if we could look at the last 8 years of Valley High funding, I mean, of the fund balance. Follow me?
Instead of from
The
February?
historical, what's the impact on the balance has been since before the rebate, and then since then throughout the last few years in operations. I think that overall horizon would be very telling, very interesting for us to kind of get a feel for. Give us a little bit of a potential long-term vision of, how long that balance is gonna, be available and not reach that red zone. I know it's the same, we do with the other model, but I just like to have something like graphically so I can
Well,
see.
Scott, you've got it on the model. You had the prior years on your model.
I do, I have that.
Yeah, I just wanted the graph, you know, like for 8 years.
Oh, yeah, how far back does your model go? I forgot.
Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up.
Well, the model's gonna change with the answer.
While he's looking that up, I just want to ask about the receivables. I want to question, how accurate are our receivables on a month-to-month basis? When you're dealing with Medicare, Medicaid, all that, how accurate is it? How close do we come out to balancing, like at year end?
We usually have a series of write-offs at the end of the year due to receivables, and those are.
And sometimes that's significant, if I remember
It has been
historically.
in the past, but that is not an issue that we're running into. We'll still have write-offs, please don't misunderstand me. But in years past, we would write off 200, 300, 400,000. That's not gonna happen. Our receivables is in much better shape, but now we can think presumptive eligibility with the state of Illinois through COVID for that. So if somebody applies for Medicaid right now, the state of Illinois just automatically approves them and puts them in. In years past, we would play the game with the state and the families and get them approved, and then there would be delays, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we spent all that money, but the state said you should have had that money, and that's a period of time that gets written off. We're getting reimbursed right off the jump from the state right now, so that's not the issue that we're seeing.
So will they go backwards on us, the state of Illinois, presumptive? All of a sudden, oh yeah, they really weren't eligible for this. Who's on the hook for that?
I've always thought that. At some point they have to, right? But right now, they have not made any waves or commitments to going back and re-auditing. They catch it during their audit periods from year to year, but you have to think so, right? But I get you have to also look at it from, at this point, the amount of manpower to do that audit after 3 years of presumptive eligibility would be daunting. And I just don't know if the state has the bandwidth to pull that off. So I think it's just gonna be, you know, they were presumed eligible.
Wow.
They're hiring 8,900 more.
Well, that's the IRS.
I guess that's how we lost billions of dollars in unemployment too.
All right, so I got Megan sitting in front of me right now. Overall, that the net income, but that includes the interest and everything else, is at negative 852 through May. So if you kind of pull that out, we're probably right on line with that 1.5 that we've been the last couple of years that we've been pulling over.
Through May, it's negative 852.
Yep.
So you're saying from May to August, those numbers are incorrect in revenues then, misstated?
From May to August.
Yeah. Because it's for, the 22 shows 8 months.
Well, I only have financial reports that are done up in the way that I can do them through May. So what you're getting in my administrator's report has current data in there. That is accurate, but I don't have it from my accountant that breaks it down into the way that it's here. So you'll get the next one June, and then we'll keep bringing it forward. So yeah, I mean, this is part of something I give you guys every week, every month.
When you're looking at the financial reports for Valley High, the way that, because Tom is looking at that information directly from his receivables, that's the report that you would follow as far as those numbers go. What we report is more of an accrual basis, so we've already made the entry to account back to 2021. And so that reflects some of the numbers that you see on the budget document.
But essentially, our year is over, we're in September, and we're getting numbers from May.
There's a lag time.
That lag time could be devastating. I just don't understand how we could catch that up, or how we shouldn't catch that up. And I don't know what the problem is. What's the lag from you?
Part of it is getting the bills, right? So you have to get all your bills in, get them processed, close the month. There's always been a month to 2 months lag in these reports. Now, it gets extended during budget season because we shift our focus over to budget, and it also will get extended January, February, because we're waiting on the outside auditor to close the previous year. We still get, we're still tracking it internally on our own, but the financial reports do lag. They've always lagged. And I don't know how to speed them up any faster or bring them any more current because of the way that all the systems work with the auditor's office and the outside auditor gets involved at certain times of the year. Just, it's always been this way. So like, I just gave you a number that doesn't reflect anything after bringing on the new admissions coordinator and all the new revenue that's coming in.
Anything else, Jim?
I just, a
Being
million and a half in the hole at the end of the year, I can understand it, but we had more than that the year before. But I just, it bothers me. I don't know how we can fix that. And is that all the way through the whole, every department? It's just this one?
When you're
Because you're dealing with Medicare and
The
Well,
way the billing works for Medicare and
Okay.
Medicaid.
Yeah, so just to give you an example though, like a service will be delivered in May, it'll be billed in June, it'll be paid in July.
That's right.
So
Okay.
It's turnaround time.
But you have a history of that going on, so you should be, in any given month, collecting those from the past as
Correct.
well. So, I mean, it should kind of smooth or flatten
from a
out
cash
little
flow
bit.
standpoint,
Right.
it's all smooth.
And it gets caught up at the end of the year with the audit. That's
Correct.
when all the year-end adjustments are made from an accounting perspective.
Right, that's why you'll get a preliminary year end and then you get a final year end from me because of all the adjustments that get.
Thank you. I just need to educate myself how we come up with these numbers. And I don't know if I'm comfortable yet, but at least I understand kind of why they're so far
On
off.
a high level, let's recap. Last year, we were about $1.6 million short. It looks like we're tracking to be about $1.5 million short. Not a lot has changed, but we are increasing our residency some. We gotta get our staffing levels up, but even before COVID, like the last year, we were a few hundred thousand short. 300,000 short.
Yeah, I mean, we were close and
Yeah,
then COVID has completely changed everything.
Well, when that 800,000, whatever, the intergovernment that's in there for this year, when that 800,000 is gone, that could be a significant amount in the future. That-
Yeah, we got one last ARPA payment coming through. We were notified on Friday that it's available. I have not had a chance to go in and actually sign the sub-award agreement and get the final number, but I believe that's it. This is the last one, and then there's no more assistance coming.
Teresa, you have a question?
I got a question, yeah, it's going back. So, maybe it was October, last October, we had this discussion about the perks and like the benefits to getting people to stay for employee retention and for drawing employees. So, I remember gonna be a little weak on this, but there was this plan that there'd be a financial benefit if somebody recommended an employee to us, there'd be a financial gain for staying. Are those costs built into this budget for how that program been as successful as you hoped, more successful, or less successful than you hoped?
Unfortunately, less.
Okay.
I was really disappointed at the response to the bonus structure that we put together. I would have thought that it would have been a lot more motivating than it is. It's still used.
Yeah.
If I got to negotiate to get a day shift or to work a night shift, you throw that bonus, the special assignment bonus on there, the pickup bonus on there. Usually I don't get them to bite. But I would really have hoped that the referral specifically would have changed it. I don't know that it's even impacted it much at all.
But the costs that we would see the future, because this referral program, the bonus program is still in play, right? So.
The savings comes from the agency costs, right? So you're,
Right, yes.
you're offsetting it from one with the other, but
Yes,
we have it looked at, but no, it has not been. It's unfortunate too.
Jim?
On that, how many of the, percentage-wise, of the hourly employees that come in take the health insurance?
You know what, I don't know that answer. I would say that's gonna be varied by position, because most of the support positions don't, whereas more of the professional positions, nurses, they tend to take it, but I have to get that number for you. I don't know off the top of my head.
The reason I'm saying, I was reading the admin service agenda, and it looks like we have to offer health insurance after 30 days instead of 3 months for hourly employees. Did I read that correctly? I think so. So maybe that'll help us a little bit in retaining.
We've had, historically, we've provided disparate accidents, access to insurance, like for exempt staff, it was 30 days, and for non-exempt, it was 60 days. It could go up to like 89 in the
Yeah.
worst case scenario. Cheryl's, again, with the interest of attraction, she said, let's just make it simple.
Yeah, it's good. It should be interesting if we retain more of that kind of staff, because when I was young, it was important to me even back then to have the health insurance. So instead of waiting 90 days, that 30
You know, it
days.
mattered, yeah, it mattered to me at 22. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Well,
Great job.
I think we're gonna move forward with the
I
budget.
think- I got to cancel the whole meeting.
I didn't mean to ask so many questions, but I just had to
No, we
get
didn't
those
have to
answers
ask
for
them.
myself,
We
because I
need to-
didn't understand where those numbers came from.
No, you need to feel comfortable with it, so we're gonna move forward with the budget, with consensus here. So on the, agenda, is there any old business? Now we're moving to future topics. What would you like to be discussed here at Valley High, in the Valley High Committee? Any suggestions?
I'll just note that, as Teresa mentioned earlier, Tom and Paula and I and Cheryl, we met a little earlier today, so maybe as next time we can talk a little bit more about employee relations. And now I know that this body isn't interested in micromanaging staff, but I think given we're having such a time attracting and retraining, like everybody's, maybe we can spend a little bit more time at our next meeting talking about employee relations. I am going to be meeting with Cheryl, with all at Valley High next week. It is an employee forum. It's not unique to Valley High. We're going to do 4 of these meetings around the county, but we are doing one at Valley High, so we'll have more of a Valley High focus, so I can report back on that.
Okay. And do you see anything that needs to be placed on the agenda next time?
Not yet. Give it
Just a
another
standard
couple of weeks.
report, maybe some resolutions, okay.
The other question was, with those survey results, which they were on here previous months, but then the surveys were not in play for a while, are those coming back soon?
Yeah, we changed vendors. So this is one of those kind of cost things we were looking at. So we were using National Research Corporation previously, and that's where all those, like the percentages that you were seeing were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
We've now moved to, I'm gonna say it wrong again, SurveyMonkey. I want to say monster.com, but we moved to SurveyMonkey. So after our meeting, I went back to the building. Tara kind of coordinates that for us, and she's going to pull some summary reports for you guys so that I can bring those forward to you.
Excellent,
So
okay.
you'll be able to at least see some new numbers. We've been now doing it for a couple months, so we should have a little bit of trending.
Okay, great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
And then remember, next meeting will be here.
Right.
In 2 meetings on November 1st, we will be on site at Valley High, so you can
Okay.
see
Oh,
the
great.
improved site, and we can be able to kind of show you out the windows and help you visualize where the expansion is going to take place.
Okay, so Steve made the motion, and who seconded it? Bob Noah. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
All right.